Welcome to the Gay Buddhist Forum, where teachers from all schools of Buddhism offer their perspectives on the Dharma and its application in modern times, especially for LGBTQI audiences. These talks are offered freely to the world and made possible by appreciative listeners. If you would like to support our efforts to share the Dharma with underserved audiences, please visit gaybuddhist.org. There you can donate, find a list of upcoming speakers, or enjoy many hundreds of these recorded talks dating back to 1996.
Well, welcome back, everybody. It's a pleasure to see everybody back on this beautiful Sunday morning. Our speaker today is a dear friend of the sangha, J.D. Doyle, who serves as a core teacher at the East Bay Meditation Center and has served as a board member and was co-founder of the LGBTQI meditation group. J.D. is in the Spirit Rock Center teacher training program and was in a Dedicated Practitioner Program and the Community Dharma Leader Program. J.D. has practiced Buddhism since 1995 in the United States, Thailand, and Burma. For over 25 years, they worked as a public school teacher, focusing on issues of equity and access. J.D. holds a bachelor's degree in environmental studies from Cornell and a master's degree in language and literacy and sociocultural studies from the University of New Mexico. J.D. identifies as gender non-conforming. They are committed to celebrating the diversity of our human sangha, addressing the impact of racism on our communities, expanding concepts of gender, and living in ways that honor the sacredness of the earth. It's a great joy to welcome back J.D. Doyle to our sangha.
Thank you so much for that introduction. I will say that I did graduate in September from the Spirit Rock teacher training, so I need to update my bio for you all. So, that was one of my big events this past year that happened. So, yeah, it's lovely to be here. It's quite a time that we're living in right now. It really is. For me, it's like, how do I find guidance and where do I begin to look for support and making decisions, and how do I move forward? And so today I wanted to talk about intention. And I also wanted to refer to what some of you may be familiar with now as one of these guidelines that often comes up in community is understanding the difference between intent and impact. And it's often this guideline, a community guideline, is one of the ones we have at the East Bay Meditation Center. It's often one of the ones that's confusing in Buddhist circles because there's a sense that focusing on intention, that we can set our sights on being good and doing well in the world and not causing harm, and that will really be a benefit. And I actually believe that to be true, that, just this intention towards non-harming is a really beautiful gift to the world. And yet there's also this way that we can sometimes, the ignorance and the habit patterns of mind can continue on these patterns from our upbringing, from our culture, all of the conditions that lead to this moment that invites us to, in addition to our intention, the Buddha invites us into this process of reflection. So we have our mindfulness practice that supports us in seeing clearly. And then there's this practice of reflection, of insight, if you will. And some of you may have practiced or know the meditation teacher, Joseph Goldstein. And he says, one of his interpretations of the Buddhist teaching is that everything rests on the tip of motivation. And so I think that this has gotten pulled out of the teaching to be that, if I only intend to do well, then I'm scot-free. And we all know that, that we didn't, how many times, I didn't really mean to do that. Oops, that wasn't my intention. And yet something, has happened that's been, not so great. And so let's just pull back and look at kind of what is happening here. And so when I looked up the definition of intention, it actually comes from the Latin roots that mean to stretch. I really like that, this idea of an intention being stretching ourselves beyond, where we are now. Like, I intend to do non-harming. That's a stretch. All is we drive the car, we plug something into the wall, and we know what's causing harm. So how do we live in a world that is this kind of cloudy place? So this intention is to grow and develop towards something, purposeful, something that supports the well-being of the world. And then if we look at this word impact, the impact of our actions, the definition of impact, it comes from the Latin to press closely into something. So, or we're rubbing up against each other, if you will, when we have impact. We're not just kind of going about, this is just me. I'm doing whatever I want. Yahoo! And so, we have these skillful intentions of developing goodwill towards others and intending to act in ways that cause harm. And then we, make mistakes. And so an example that I think is really useful is you're walking down a aisle. And of course, we don't go into places with other people anymore, but we're starting, and you step on someone's toe. And then you're like, oh, I'm sorry. I didn't see your foot. I didn't mean to. But, depending on your shoes, if you're wearing stilettos, you're going to be causing that person some pain. And that person will be, ow, my toe hurts. And you're like, oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. So that's the intent. It's no, I didn't really mean to cause you any harm. I just not used to wearing these shoes, right? And then we have to attend to the pain. So at that point, you want to switch your focus from your original intention to the impact, because we live in a relational world, so this impact of pressing close to. And so this encourages us not just to be sorry, whatever, but to really understand that we engage with each other. Sylvia Boorstein says, wise intention is the cornerstone of wise effort, of actions that are wholesome and positive. The instructions for wise effort call for us to continually evaluate our actions and choose those that lead to less suffering and eschew those that lead to more suffering. This is easily determined by checking if the action is being fueled by wholesome or unwholesome intentions. So clarity about our intentions needs to be present to inform wise effort. And so, I don't often like the words wholesome and unwholesome because they're so often used against us queer people as ew, they're so unwholesome, and so I often like the translation skillful and unskillful, because wholesome kind of seems like it might not include me. And so skillful, but what does it mean that we want to evaluate our actions based on whether they're skillful or unskillful? And the way that the Buddha suggests that we evaluate our actions is based on the three poisons. So greed, hatred, and ignorance. And so we can check when something happens, what was my intention when I didn't mean to. Sometimes maybe it was just pure mistake, but sometimes maybe there was a little greed there. You're I'm going to offer you, turn the plate around and offer you the biggest cookie is on my side, just something little like that, I'm offering you something, but there's a little bit of greed in there. Or maybe there's some aversion, you're doing something, but there's some sort of aversion in the body. So we can evaluate our effort and to see if any of these are arising. And the one that's the hardest to know is the ignorance or delusion. And this is sort of when we're, not seeing clearly. And this is the habit patterns of mind. These are the conditions that we have evolved into over all of our lives. And some people would say lifetimes. So these are the conditions. So by their very definition, ignorance is hard to see, hard to uproot. And so I wanted to share one of the Buddha's suttas. This is in the Majjhima Nikaya 61. And this is when the Buddha is talking to a young monk, Rahula, who happens to be his son, who was 7 years old at the time. So I just imagine if Rahula's probably under a lot of pressure. He's 7 years old. His dad's like the head of this whole place, and he made a mistake. And so the Buddha, takes him aside to talk to him. And so, he makes the mistake. And so the Buddha talks to him and he says, and this is from the sutta, "What do you think, Rahula? What is the purpose of a mirror?" And so Rahula says, "For the purpose of reflection, Venerable Sir. So too, Rahula, an action with the body should be done after repeated reflection. An action by speech should be done after repeated reflection. An action by mind should be done after repeated reflection." And so the Buddha, is using this image of the mirror, because Rahula is 7, and you can look at the mirror and see what a mirror is. And the thing that I like about this image of reflection, different than the idea of evaluation, is oftentimes we evaluate ourselves and we get right into this place of shame and blame. Oh, I can't believe I did that. The self-flagellation of like, oh, well, why did they do that? They shouldn't have. It's like, if only they had. And so this idea of a mirror is reflecting the way things are without that additional thing of like adding shame or blame on. And so what the Buddha is suggesting to Rahula in this sutta is that, and this is where I think reflection is not quite the same word, that whatever the word is in Pali is not the same as reflection, because he suggests you should reflect before, during, and after your action. And in our language, we often use reflection just afterwards. But here, the suggestion is that you can reflect before, during, or after. And so the Buddha continues and he says, when you want to act with the body, you should reflect, does this act with the body, let's just add the speech and mind here. Does this act with the body, speech, or mind that I want to do lead to harming myself, harming others, or harming both? Is it unskillful with suffering as its outcome and result? If while reflecting in this way, this act with the body, with the speech, or with my mind that I will do leads to harming myself, harming others, or harming both, Buddha says, to the best of your ability, Rahula, you should not do such a deed. But if while reflecting in this way, that this act with the body, speech, or mind that I want to do doesn't lead to harming myself, harming others, or harming both, it's skillful with happiness as its outcome and result, then, Rahula, you should do such a deed. So this is a very interesting interaction that the Buddha is having with Rahula, because the Buddha really sees this relational piece of our lives as like not harming for ourselves, not harming for the other, and not harming for both. And that's actually a really high bar. Like, because like sometimes after something I'll be like, ooh, I gave too much. I'll be like, I'm not feeling so good about that. Or sometimes you'll be like realizing in the other direction. We probably are all different places on that spectrum. And the thing the Buddha says to Rahula, to the best of your ability. So we're all on this path at different places, and we're all going to be doing it to the best of our ability. So we're going to do this reflection. And then when we do something, it's not like, ooh, beat myself up. It's like, oh, I'm going to reflect and keep my intention for non-harming and for this beautiful happiness that can come as a result of this integrity that we can bring in the world. One of the things that Pema Chodron talks about in this way of doing things to the best of our ability is she has a really amazing article that on how to fail better, lean into the unknown. And so I think that this is a really great place for us, especially for those of us who are perfectionists or have learned that we're not good enough. And she says, if there's one thing that is not stressed very much, but is really needed, it is knowing how to fail well. The fine art of failing. There is a lot of emphasis on succeeding. And whether we buy the hype or not, we all want to succeed, especially if you consider success as it works out the way I want it to. So failing, by that definition, is that it didn't work out the way you wanted it to. And failing is what we usually don't get a lot of preparation for. So she says, fail again, fail better. It's like how to get good at holding the rawness of vulnerability in your heart, or how to get good at welcoming the unwelcome. Can you allow yourself to feel what you feel when things don't go the way you want them to, when things don't go the way you hoped for and wished for and longed for them to go? So this idea of failing, of like welcoming this rawness of vulnerability, to me is a really powerful way of looking at failing, because it actually indicates how essential it is for us to make mistakes. And for example, like this year, the newness of so many of the ways we had to be in the world means that we make mistakes. And so the ensuing onslaught of emotions that arise from that can be considerable, because we, intend like, oh, I didn't mean to do that. And then our heart can be like, oh, I'm so sorry. And so sometimes in that place of, oh, we can just turn away and stuff our feelings. And so this idea of failing and this idea of turning towards those difficult emotions, what Pema Chodron calls the rawness of vulnerability in your heart. Can we get good, as she says, what's it like to get good at holding that rawness of vulnerability in your heart? Like, I think of it actually as some stamina. I've really had to create some stamina around holding that, because I have had so much practice of like, there's just a lot of pain and I'm just going to put it over there in the box and get on with my life. And there's some more, just put it in another box and get on with my life. And so allowing some of this to be held, welcoming the unwelcome, she says. Whether the unwelcome is the sickness, or the unwelcome is, something that happens to ourselves or to a friend. How can we practice in this way of tending, attending, like we think of our mindfulness as attention. And I like the word, the tend in there, because I think of it really helps to bring mindfulness into this place of really this warm, loving awareness. If we consider ourselves like a garden that we're nurturing, we're tending, sometimes we go out and we pull the weeds. Sometimes we're digging the holes and planting new seeds or plants. And sometimes we have to harvest. That's the whole thing. And sometimes you plant something and, it just doesn't work. The slug get to it, or it's in the wrong place and it doesn't thrive. How can we tend something raw and failing and feeling and over again, allowing like the seasons of our lives. And so I think that if we look at it, this idea of intention, this tending, the same thing of attending and intention, then we can incorporate this idea of reflection, because intention sort of me seems very static. I have an intention and then I'm just going to kind of go forward with it. And, you know, those of you who, you know, gotten used to not looking at real maps anymore and just plugging in, you know, into Siri will probably have had this experience where you put the address in and then along the way something happens. Like I remember in Baltimore once going to the train station, and all of a sudden we ended up in this parking lot where all the buses were. And the buses could go through this shortcut, but in the car that we were in, we had to go back out and around and you know, reroute because we just were paying attention to this is the direction we're going to, this is the goal, but not realizing along the way that we actually needed to do a little more reflecting and kind of paying attention. And so sometimes we really just think, oh, I'm doing well, I have a good intention. We forget that part of attending along the way. And so one of the things that I think happens is we can use our mindfulness and the way that mindfulness invites us into non-reactivity. So what I think of as a pause to attend to. So like, especially during, so if we had the before and then during, like the mindfulness, so often I experience sort of as a pause when I'm really can pause and check in with my body, and I can be like, oh, you know, is it okay how's it going now? And in that pausing, we can notice, you know, create the space so that we can see whether or not we're actually still going in the direction we want to be going. And then the interesting thing is that in the sutta, when the Buddha speaks about it, how do we reflect after? He changes up, you know, he so much like repeats everything when in the suttas, but there's a little bit of changing in this one. So the Buddha says to Rahula, if after acting the whole this act with body, speech, or mind that I have done leads to harming myself, harming others, or harming both, if it's unskillful with suffering as its outcome and result, then Rahula, you should reveal and clarify such a deed to a teacher or a sensible spiritual companion. And having revealed it, you should restrain yourself in the future. I really love this word, this translation of this one, the sensible spiritual companion. You know, I know I have some friends who are like sensible spiritual companions, and other ones who will be like, I'll tell them, they're like, whatever, you know. And sometimes it's good to be kind of cavalier, and sometimes it's good to have those people who will help us, you know, that we can ask those questions of. And so, you know, this is really another place where the Buddha is saying you don't have to figure this out all by yourself. It's why we come to groups like the Gay Buddhist Fellowship. It's why we have, you know, friends that we check in with so that we can be like, I'm trying to figure out how I worked here. What happened? And then again, at the end, if the Buddha says, if what after reflecting is skillful with happiness as its outcome, you should live in rapture and joy because of this, training day and night in skillful qualities. So this is also a really important thing. If there's something that you have done that is skillful, that brings beauty to your life and others' lives, is to reflect on that and to allow the joy of that to be held. Because sometimes we're like, oh, whatever, it wasn't that big. It wasn't such a big deal. But the Buddha actually really encourages us to feel when we do something that has caused positive impact on ourselves or others. So sometimes I have to remember when I treat myself well, because self-care is not always something that comes easily to me. So sometimes I have to be like, oh, right. Yeah, you did a good job there. Or, just allowing myself when I'm doing something that's benefit for someone else, to allow myself to feel the joy in my heart, because I think it's really important to allow the goodness that what we're doing to be there, rather than get caught in the not good enough. Oh, I could have done more, but just really allowing that reflection, joy to happen. And for me, this isn't particularly important because, one of the places that I've been doing a lot of work, especially this past year, is working in with various insight meditation communities, with the white people in the communities, looking at uprooting these conditions that cause suffering and working to create anti-racist sanghas. And, there's always more that we could do. And so it really is important to use this process of my intention before, my intention during, my intention afterwards. So one of the places in this is that oftentimes we make mistakes. We've harmed somebody. And so, I could kind of put on the mantle of like, oh, I'm teaching this class. I'm a good white person. I'm going to, create this anti-racist community. And then I could be like, hey, you're just like, I'm going to shame you. So then I feel like I'm doing the right thing. And sometimes it is important for us to help others to see what's happening. But are we in this practice of making ourselves feel good by putting someone else down? And are we also in this place of fearing the aversion, what somebody else will say, so we don't speak up? So these are places for reflection that we can look at. Where is greed arising? Greed that I want to be a good person. And the fear, and sometimes the fear comes from this place of, the cult of politeness that can often happen in white communities, that we hold this idea of a superficial kind of niceness above a real intimacy. And this encouragement that Pema Chodron has to feel that rawness in our hearts, of really getting close to each other, of really being able to speak to each other about the difficult and challenging and complexities of our life. They're not easy conversations. So, with our practice of mindfulness and that action of pausing, we can reflect to try not to get caught in the greed, not to get caught in the hatred, not to let the patterns of ignorance just allow us to continue in the same way that we have. And one of the places that I think that we sometimes overlook this is our internal conversations. The internal conversations that happen where, how are we treating ourselves? Are we putting ourselves down with the conversations in our mind? Are we, pulling ourselves up and, and then we fall, are we on that place? So these critiques of like, oh, I'm slacking. Oh, I could have done, if I'm not kind to myself, if I don't practice that inner speech of kindness, what is going to happen when I meet another? The habit patterns that are sown in our thoughts reveal ourselves in our lives. When I started practicing, one of the inner critics that I ran into a lot was this, I named this pattern the soldier. This was this inner way of being that I just began to see that it was like, sit down, meditate, okay, do this, pay attention, like it was a drill sergeant that was, wanting me to be good in the world, but it was not really very kind. And so I could see this habit pattern of mind of, that this was just like focusing on me as an individual enough that, I was really striving. And instead, as I've begun to meditate, I've begun to see myself relationally. So this isn't just about me. This is about non-harming for myself, non-harming for the other, non-harming for both of us in community. A much wider perspective. And so these patterns that, of this drill sergeant, which obviously supported me in resilience, like, getting me through a lot of things, didn't actually need to be my only way of being in the world. What would it be to allow the care and the kindness to support me as well as just this encouragement of the discipline? And so this cultivation, this intentional cultivation of loving kindness and compassion where our heart responds to the needs of the world, and then the joy that is responsive as well to what we see happening. So this active cultivation. So I really appreciate this sutta because the Buddha is showing us how to train in our actions of our body, the actions of our speech, and the thoughts in our mind. How to direct our practice towards non-greed. So we're not being uprooted by the forces of hatred of like, I don't like them, but non-greed, which is generosity. What does it mean to be generous in our lives? And then non-hatred or loving kindness. What would the kind action be reflecting before, during, and action for myself, for others, for our community? And then non-delusion, which is wisdom, which, like I said, is the hardest because our habit patterns of mind from our culture, from our families, from our schooling, all of these things are what create the conditions that we then believe to be true. And so this place of wisdom is what grows, I think, as we practice generosity and kindness. We can kind of uproot the conditions that have trained us that getting more for myself is actually happiness. And so the Buddha, in the speaking to Rahul about this, says train this to the best of your ability. Training. So that's the intention. The attending is the tending to the training. And so one of the words that is also used in this training is this active purification. And I think I may have shared this with you before, but one of the translations that I've heard of the word for purification is also blossoming. And this metaphor of blossoming, to me, it's just such a beautiful thing, because purification feels to me like I have to get rid of something in me that's bad. And this idea of blossoming, it's so gay, first of all. And also, it's just like, we're just like blossoming into whatever flower or plant that we are. We're blossoming into our own authenticity. We already have these seeds within us for this process of generosity and kindness. And this wholehearted way that we can engage in it. And it's not linear, We're attending to ourselves with as much care and kindness as we can, recognizing our inherent interconnectedness, so that we care for ourselves and we care for each other, and we can hold ourselves and our planet in these intentions for non-harming, so that we understand that our freedom, our happiness depends on all of us, that we're connected to all being. Thank you for your kind listening today. I'm just going to ring the bell and we'll move into a place for some reflections. So we have some time for some questions, reflections, comments, thoughts about this practice that we're engaged in. Maybe if there's anything that came up from the talk or something that's happening in your life that relates to the practice and you want to join in. And let's see if there's something in the chat. Oh, thank you. So we have the discussion agreements. Oh, there we go. No blaming or shaming, and understand the difference between intent and impact. Wow, look at that. Maintain confidentiality. Thank you. One speaker at a time.
Grisha, hi JD.
Hi.
Thanks very much for your talk. And since there was no one chiming in, I'd like to just say it was heart juicy. Thank you. And I've been thinking about this. My practice lately every morning has been intention setting. That's I do these guided meditations for intention setting. And, I'm a teacher and we're back in the classroom, and every day I have just numerous opportunities to create love and joy or pain and hurt. And I've been kind of panicked all weekend because this one student was head down on the desk and moping and kind of pouting. And I'm really triggered by privilege and pretentious kids. It's just a thing that gets to me. And so I judged that little girl, and she was like really in pain. And I was like my dad and mom, which is like, buck it up, man. What's wrong with you? And I kind of was like, what are you pouting about? Do you want to talk about it? If you want to talk about it, we can work out the problem. But if you're just going to have your head down and pout, we can't really talk it out. So it wasn't like, oh, honey. It was just like, I went to this place of like, come on, girl, get out of it, And so now I feel I'm reflecting, and I'm like, my intention was to get her to talk about her pain, but it wasn't a very kind and loving approach. And that kind of stuff just happens all the time in the classroom, but also just with my friends and family. I have this way that I think about how one should process. I'm a longtime 12-step person, so you just blob your stuff out into the group and you get feedback. And so anyway, that's what came up for me. And I'm thinking trying to craft what I'm going to say in the morning when I see her, and try to, not just say, I'm sorry, I was such a bitch, but actually try to do some healing work there. Anyway, thanks.
And that's the thing that's interesting to me about this training that the Buddha has with Rahula is that, before, during, and after. So it's not like, I messed up, it's over, I'm a loser for the rest of my life. We have to engage in this messiness of humanity. We've learned all these ways of being that sometimes are useful and, sometimes are not. So thank you for sharing that. And my heart just, Krishna, I just know what it means right now to be in schools, and please give yourself tremendous compassion and care. What you're handling in this year at this point is just tremendous. So, that this kid needed some more out of you when you're already wrong at your, it seems really hard. So I would really encourage you to bring that non-harming towards yourself too. Well, thank you for sharing. Okay. Next, please.
Hi. Thank you so much for a very rich talk, JD. It's that idea of sharing with an intentional spiritual companion, like lessons learned or experiences had, sounds a little bit to this nun like confession, and but I do think I think it's really important to triangulate, like with other people, like what's going on here? Because so often, especially in discussions related to race and social justice these days, it's like intention can be so far removed from how something is received, and to not like end up self-flagellating about that, but to actually not turn it into like, oh, this my problem. I'm a sinner, but to actually like, well, how do I express myself in the future, or in ways that are received as intended, and make that the kind of objective. But it makes for really difficult discussions, but it's really important to, as you're going through that, to, I think, share with other people like what's going on, and find out more about how your intentions are received.
Yeah, thanks. That's the third jewel of the sangha that, the Buddha says, that the whole of the holy life, like that creating that place to share that. So thank you. Thomas.
JD, thank you so much for really a deep, nuanced and wonderful talk. Had me like taking down page of notes. But I do have a question. I really think that what's missing today is this reflection before we act, looking at our intention, because of the pace of life, and that we're so accustomed to act, have an opinion, do something. The hamster wheel is spinning faster than ever. But I think through the force of habit, we just get into the habit of acting, and also we become convinced, each one of us, that our intentions are good and pure. We've looked at them once, so we're convinced we don't have to go back and look. So I can even believe that there might be one or two people left in this country in this day and age who, maybe still believe that flying the Confederate flag is an act of nostalgia for their family and history and stuff, without thinking about the intent. One or two people. But so as we move through the world, through our days, already convinced that our intentions are pure, do you have any advice, or maybe a little technique or tip on how to pause, how to stop and reflect and look at that again and again, without grinding our whole life to a halt? That might be a tall order, but if you have any thoughts.
Well, I think what you were just saying there is that sense of pausing. We are, like you said, caught on that hamster wheel, and anytime, that's where the practice of mindfulness, the ongoing, practice of mindfulness, if we can then have time for that, then when we're in the busyness, if we can then, connect with our bodies, if we can have like the embodied, like oftentimes, we live here. And so if we can check in with the body and the earth and the full embodied sense of what is happening now, to verify it, like, is this actually what's going on? And so that's, to me, is just like places of pausing in your life, like just bringing a practice, like I'm going to pause every time that my cell phone goes, this distraction advice. I'm just going to pause before I pick it up. I'm going to pause, every time before I turn the computer on, just bringing in places to pause. Just like you might go to the gym, just like bringing in practices for pausing before we eat. Like I grew up in a family that said grace, I threw it out for a long time, but now I do that again, just to think about how connected I am to all the beings who supported me there. So I just think, there are each of us will find ways, but as you say, it's not easy and it's very complicated.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Amelia, nice to.
Hi.
Hi.
So I'm Amelia. My pronouns are Zizier, and I didn't introduce myself in the beginning, but this is my first time here. So thank you, everybody, for having me.
Thanks for being here.
Thank you. And my question is, well, similar to Thomas, I had so many things that resonated with me from this talk. I have a page and a half of notes or so, but my question is about, you mentioned the idea of your sort of inner drill sergeant when it comes to meditation. And so I was wondering if you could share a little bit about how you work with that. And so for myself, I just came to the full realization about a month ago that I'm non-binary. And so I've been really kind of struggling with the fact that I'm spending so much time thinking about my gender, looking at different videos and reading other people's experiences. And I feel like that is taking away from what I should be doing as a Buddhist in my meditation practice. So how would you recommend going about navigating that inner drill sergeant?
Thank you so much for the question. So what I hear you speaking to is that like each of us has like different themes that we get hooked on, and then all of a sudden our mind keeps spinning on them. And most of the time there are things that are really things that like, oh, I have to figure this out, and like the idea of like just exploring gender is like, there's a gender galaxy. And so it's an endless, and we're going to be engaged in this for the rest of our life. So of course it's going to be something to address. And that spinning, we all know that spinning, just the spinning in the mind is suffering. And so the Buddha had this great word for the proliferation, and it's called papancha. And so that papancha is that place where we're just caught in the spinning. And so that's what I'm hearing there. It's not actually this fruitful, it's the spinning. And so one of the techniques that people suggest, and I've used it, is that you label it. And so you'd be like, oh, whatever, gender questions or not, whatever the label is, like, considering. So the label can just be like, oh, and then just like put the pause on that, because sometimes putting the pause on it will actually allow the deeper insights to arise. Because if we're spinning, it's all just up here in the mind, and then putting the pause on the spinning can sometimes allow the embodied insight to arise. So, but in terms of the drill sergeant, I'd say an ongoing practice of loving kindness, just like, so that when the drill sergeant arises, you're like, oh, thank you so much. And, I don't actually have to follow you today, or today I better follow you because I'm just so that we have the kindness towards it. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Ron, I think we have time for you, and I think that would be it then we need to finish up. You're muted, Ron.
Thank you, JD. I enjoyed your talk. Thank you. It raised some questions for me of when you're past the point of reflection and you suspect something has been received by someone in a way different than intended. What are the steps for attempting to engage with someone who you're not necessarily open to engaging on the topic?
Right. So
it's not either party.
Apologies, amendments, making things right, that sort of thing. Is that what you're talking about?
I suppose that's an option.
Yeah. So that is a huge topic. And just to kind of briefly be like, making amends is huge. And also, how do we not prioritize our feeling good around the process, so that, that might actually be further harming the other person, because I just want to make myself feel better about it. And so, like, for example, in actions around race, sometimes I want to be like, oh, well, I did it because of blah, blah, blah. But it might be more important for me to talk about it to my sensible companion than to the person who I harmed with, in that case, like another white person, like to talk about it there. And so then I might sometimes, if the person who I've harmed is not amenable to me engaging with them, I might try to do something like, I'm going to learn more so that this doesn't happen again. So it's engaging on my own path. And then of course there will be people that we're closer to will be like, can I share this with you? And trying in because I've been engaging in this process of intentional apologies and amendments for a while, and just really trying to see when I'm trying to look good in it, and try to be like, putting it out and then reading it through and be like, okay, where's the ego in here? So yeah, those are some of the things that I do, but that's a really beautiful practice. And I'm sorry we don't have more time to talk about it. So thanks for bringing it up.
Thank you.
Thank you, JD. Dana is the Pali word for generosity. So to the extent possible, it would be great if you could make a donation through our website or PayPal or by a check to help us meet the expenses of our sangha, including rent and on the meditation space, which hopefully we'll get back into soon. And the newsletter that goes out largely to people who are incarcerated, and for us to offer Dana to our speakers. And we also meet on Wednesday evenings at the same login on Zoom at 7:30 on Wednesday nights. Everybody's welcome to join in those meetings. And I guess those are my announcements. Does anybody else have announcements? I know JD has an event coming up.
Yeah, I just want to mention that GBF has an account at Community Thrift at 17th in Valencia. So if you have something that you're no longer serving you might consider donating it. Check their website because they don't take everything. But it's a great way to support GBF, another way of doing Dana. Thank you.
I have a request. This is Paul. I have the neuropathy of my feet has gotten bad such that I can't drive anymore. So I'm going to get a little stick that comes out from the steering wheel that accelerates and brakes. But I need training on how to use it. I haven't been able to find anyone. So if anyone knows a disabled driver or can steer me in the direction where I can learn how to use it. I tried. The guy was going to put it in. He let me try it on his car once. But after his head went through the windshield, he thought I should get lessons. So that's what I need. I need lessons on how to drive a disabled vehicle with that stick.
And how can people get in touch with you, Paul?
I'll put that on the chat.
The Bay Area Outreach Program, they do mostly recreational programs, but there's a lot of people who are active and engaged things there. So the acronym is BORP, B-O-R-P.
B-O-R-T?
P, program. I think it's P as in program.
B-O-R-P, okay.
Yeah.
Is that in San Francisco?
It's in the East Bay, but they have people all over the Bay Area. So
I could look up the acronym BORP and find something. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So yes, JD, you have.
Okay, thanks. So I have a series that I'm doing co-teaching on queer joy and resilience in May, and 3 Monday evenings. And then also, if you're curious about where I'm teaching, I keep it updated at my website, heartmindteaching.com. So that's about what's happening. I'm
looking forward to your teachings on gender galaxy. That's my favorite phrase today.
Well, it's not a friend of mine came up, with that, because they were like, gender is not a spectrum; it's a galaxy. You know, so
it's wonderful.
Yeah. I'm happy to teach on that. I love that. So invite me back.
Okay, for sure. So would you care to offer the dedication of merit today?
Sure. I'd love to. So one of the practices that we engage in that reflects our interconnectedness with each other as the sangha and with all beings is this practice of dedicating the merit, so that we can acknowledge that what we're doing is more than just for ourselves. Even though we are a benefit, we could also offer that benefit intentionally to someone in our lives who might be in need of support. We could offer it to all beings. We could offer it sort of directionally or generally. So I invite you to consider who in your communities may be in need right now that you would like to offer the dedication of merit to. And just do that silently within your practice. So knowing how deeply our lives intertwine, we offer any merit from our practice today, from our intentions, from our conversations, from our meditation, from our thoughts, any beauty, any truth, any wisdom that has arisen. We offer any merit to all beings everywhere. May all beings everywhere be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all beings everywhere know peace.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, JD.
Thanks so much. It's so nice to see you all. Appreciate it.
Thank you, JD.
Thank you, JD.
Thank you so much, JD.
Okay, bye.
Bye. Take care.
Thank you, JD.
Thank you for listening to the Gay Buddhist Forum. If you would like to hear several new talks per month and be notified of upcoming speakers so you can participate live, please subscribe to this podcast, like us on Facebook, and join our mailing list by visiting gaybuddhist.org.